I never expected to go to war with an HOA president over garbage cans. But life has a funny way of turning mundane suburban conflicts into all-out battles. It started with a simple violation notice that arrived in my mailbox on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and escalated into what my neighbors now refer to as the Great Pinewood Estates standoff. My name is Noah Velasquez, and until 6 months ago, I'd never given much thought to the politics of suburban living. I'd purchased my first home in Pinewood Estates, a picturesque neighborhood in Fairfield, Connecticut, after years of saving and dreaming of homeownership. The 3-bedroom colonial with its white picket fence and spacious yard seemed perfect. The American dream materialized in 2,400 square feet of hardwood floors and granite countertops. The selling agent had mentioned something about an HOA, but I'd brushed it off. They just make sure nobody paints their house neon green or lets their lawn turn into a jungle, she'd assured me with a laugh. The monthly fee of $175 seemed reasonable for the community pool and landscaping of common areas. What the agent failed to mention was Barbara Kendrick, or as she preferred to be addressed, Madam President. Barbara had been running the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association with an iron fist for nearly a decade. A woman in her mid-50s with an immaculately maintained blonde bob and a wardrobe consisting exclusively of pastel pantsuits, she'd made it her personal mission to enforce every single line of the HOA bylaws with religious fervor. My first encounter with Barbara came just 3 weeks after I'd moved in. I'd placed my garbage bins at the curb the evening before pickup, as I'd always done at my previous apartment complex. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:30 p.m. Hello. I opened the door to find Barbara standing there, a clipboard clutched to her chest and a saccharine smile plastered across her face. Mr. Velasquez, I presume? I'm Barbara Kendrick, HOA president. She extended her hand, which I reluctantly shook. I notice you've put your garbage bins out this evening. Yes, for tomorrow's pickup, I replied, confused by the visit. Barbara's smile never wavered as she said, according to the Pinewood Estates HOA bylaws, Section 14, Paragraph 3, garbage bins may only be placed at the curb after 5 a.m. and must be removed by 8 p.m. on the day of collection. She thrust a paper at me. Here's your first courtesy warning. 3 violations result in fines starting at $50 and increasing with each subsequent violation. I stared at the paper, dumbfounded. But the truck comes at 6 a.m. You expect me to get up before dawn to put out my trash? Many residents set alarms. It's part of maintaining our community standards. She glanced past me into my home. Oh, and I notice you haven't installed regulation window treatments yet. You have 30 days from move-in to comply with approved styles. You're at. She consulted her clipboard. 23 days now. After she left, I spent the evening reading through the 56-page HOA covenant I'd signed without proper scrutiny. It was a masterpiece of micromanagement, regulating everything from the acceptable species of flowers in front yards to the maximum decibel level of outdoor gatherings, which, incidentally, required HOA approval at least 14 days in advance. For a few months, I tried to play by the rules. I dutifully installed the approved beige blinds in all street-facing windows. I measured my grass weekly to ensure it never exceeded the permitted 3.5 inches in height. I even filled out the required form to get permission to host a small barbecue for my colleagues. But the garbage bin issue became my breaking point. Getting up at 4:45 a.m. to place bins at the curb was inconvenient but manageable. However, Barbara seemed to have developed a special interest in my trash collection routine. Despite following the rules, I began receiving violation notices claiming my bins were out too early or positioned incorrectly. After receiving my third notice and a $50 fine, I decided to speak with the waste management company directly. "Oh, the Pinewood Estates route," said Frank, the route manager, with a knowing sigh. "Look, we've had issues there before. Mrs. Kendrick insists we service her home first, around 6 a.m., but we can't get to the entire neighborhood that early. Some houses don't get service until 9 or 10. So I'm getting fined for having my bins out after 8 p.m. on pickup day, but you might not collect until 10 a.m., I asked, feeling my blood pressure rising. That's about the size of it, Frank confirmed. We've tried explaining this to her, but she insists the HOA rules are the HOA rules. The next trash day, I decided to conduct an experiment. I placed a small wildlife camera in my magnolia tree, pointing toward the street. Then I put my bins out at exactly 5:01 a.m. and left for work. When I returned that evening and reviewed the footage, what I saw made my jaw drop. At 8:15 a.m., a silver Mercedes pulled up beside my house. Barbara Kendrick emerged, looked around furtively, and then I couldn't believe my eyes. She physically moved my garbage bins from the curb onto my driveway, about 10 feet back. The waste management truck arrived at 8:47 a.m., and seeing my bins away from the curb, drove right past. I watched the footage 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Barbara Kendrick, HOA president and self-appointed guardian of community standards, was deliberately sabotaging my garbage collection. The next day, I requested a meeting with the HOA board, armed with my video evidence. The 5-member board, consisting of Barbara, 2 elderly gentlemen who appeared half asleep, and 2 women who kept exchanging nervous glances, convened in the community center's meeting room. Mr. Velasquez, we understand you have concerns about trash collection, Barbara began, her voice dripping with condescension. But I must remind you that proper channels for grievances include submitting Form 27B, which must be. I cut her off by connecting my laptop to the projector. I'd like to show the board something first, if you don't mind. The color drained from Barbara's face as the footage played. The elderly gentleman suddenly became very alert. The 2 women exchanged glances that had transformed from nervous to shocked. This is an invasion of privacy. Barbara sputtered when the video ended. Recording without consent is against. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for audio recordings, I interjected calmly. And there's no expectation of privacy on a public street. But more importantly, what you did constitutes tampering with private property and deliberately interfering with contracted services. One of the elderly gentlemen cleared his throat. Barbara, is this true? Did you move his garbage bins? Barbara's face flushed. I was merely enforcing the bylaws. His bins were improperly positioned, and they were at the curb exactly where they should be for collection, I said. You moved them after the prescribed time, ensuring I'd miss pickup, and then fined me for a violation you created. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Barbara stormed out. The 2 women started frantically flipping through the bylaws looking for relevant sections, and the elderly gentleman asked me to email them the video footage. I thought this would end the matter, but I'd severely underestimated Barbara Kendrick's capacity for petty vengeance. The next trash day, I again placed my bins at the curb at 5 a.m. sharp. This time, I didn't go to work but watched from my window. At 7:30 a.m., Barbara's silver Mercedes pulled up. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped outside just as she was reaching for my bins. Good morning, Barbara, I called out cheerfully. Beautiful day to respect other people's property, isn't it? She froze, hand outstretched, then straightened up as if nothing unusual was happening. I was just checking if your bins were regulation distance from the curb. With your hands. I asked, still recording. Interesting measuring technique, her eyes narrowed to slits. You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Velasquez. The HOA has ways of dealing with troublemakers. Is that a threat, Barbara? Because it sounds like one, and I'm recording this conversation. She glared at me, then stormed back to her car, parked it directly in front of my house, blocking the curb where my bins were placed, and walked away toward her home 3 doors down. The waste management truck arrived 30 minutes later, but couldn't access my bins because of Barbara's car. I showed the driver my video of what had happened. Man, she's still at it. The driver, whose name tag read Dave, shook his head. She's been doing this kind of stuff for years. Look, I'm not supposed to, but... He jumped out, moved my bins to an accessible spot, emptied them and placed them back at my curb. Good luck with the dragon lady. I thanked him profusely, but my gratitude was short-lived. Later that day, I received not one but 3 violation notices. Improper garbage bin placement, creating a public nuisance, and hostile behavior toward HOA officials, each carrying a $100 fine. This pattern continued for 3 more weeks. Barbara would park her car to block my garbage pickup. I'd document it, the sympathetic drivers would work around it when possible, and I'd receive more violation notices and fines. My account with the HOA was supposedly now $1,200 in arrears, a sum I had no intention of paying for manufactured violations. It was time to change tactics. My neighbor to the left, Martin Rodriguez, had been watching this unfold with increasing amusement. One evening, as we were both out watering our regulation height lawns, he wandered over. "You know," Martin said casually, "my cousin works for Peterson's Towing downtown. Did you know that our HOA covenant has very specific rules about street parking?" I raised an eyebrow. "I haven't studied that section closely." Martin smiled. Section 22, paragraph 7 states that no vehicle may be parked on the street for more than 4 consecutive hours without moving between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. It's to prevent people from using our streets as long-term parking. "Is that so?" I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. Barbara pushed for that rule 3 years ago when someone's college-age son kept having friends park on our street. She's used it selectively to target people she doesn't like. "Interesting," I replied, wheels turning in my head. "Very interesting." That night, I read Section 22 in its entirety. Martin was right, and furthermore, the covenant stated that residents could report violations directly to the HOA-approved towing company without board approval in cases of clear and ongoing violations. The next trash day, Barbara's Mercedes appeared right on schedule, parking to block my bins. I waited exactly 4 hours and 1 minute, then called Peterson's Towing. "Yes, I'd like to report an HOA parking violation at 427 Magnolia Drive in Pinewood Estates." "Yes, it's been there well over the 4-hour limit. Silver Mercedes, license plate KEK 7742. "Yes, I've documented the time with photos." "That's correct. I'm a resident reporting under Section 22 of the Covenant. Thank you." 40 minutes later, I watched with immense satisfaction as Barbara's $80,000 car was hoisted onto a tow truck and driven away. The screaming I heard 3 houses down about an hour later was like music to my ears. Barbara appeared at my door that evening, face contorted with rage, clutching a receipt for the $275 towing fee and $120 impound lot charge. "You did this," she hissed, waving the paper in my face. I maintained a neutral expression. "Did what, Barbara? Enforce the HOA rules." "I thought you'd appreciate my commitment to community standards." "This is personal harassment. I'll have you evicted. I'll place a lien on your property." Spittle flew from her mouth as she ranted. "For following the rules you so passionately defend." "That would be quite hypocritical, don't you think?" I smiled pleasantly. "Oh, and while we're discussing rules, I'd like to point out that your yard appears to be 3.75 inches in height, a 1/4 inch over regulation. Should I submit that on Form 27B, or is there a more appropriate channel?" She stormed off and I closed my door, heart pounding but spirits soaring. For the first time since moving to Pinewood Estates, I felt like I'd stood my ground effectively. The next week, Barbara tried a different approach. Instead of parking directly in front of my house, she parked her car 1 house over, still effectively blocking the waste management truck's access to my bins, but technically not in front of my property. I waited 4 hours and 1 minute, then called Peterson's Towing again. The driver who arrived was Martin's cousin, Javier, who gave me a knowing wink as he hooked up Barbara's Mercedes. "She's parked in front of the Wilsons' house," I explained. "They're on vacation in Europe for 3 weeks. I'm watching their property for them, and they definitely didn't authorize anyone to park there." "Don't worry, man. I know exactly what's going on here," Javier assured me. "Everyone at the company knows about the Pinewood Estates HOA president. You're not the first person she's harassed, trust me." This time, Barbara had to pay $395. The base towing fee had increased because it was a weekend. Week 3. Barbara parked her car on the opposite side of the street, still managing to block access to my bins due to our street's narrow width. 4 hours and 1 minute later, another call to Peterson's Towing. By week 4, news of our ongoing battle had spread throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors would casually walk by on trash days, pretending to be out for morning strolls while actually hoping to witness the next installment of what was now being called the Trash Wars. Some even brought coffee and sat on nearby benches, barely disguising their entertainment. Barbara tried different strategies, parking at angles, claiming her car had broken down, even attempting to get one of her supporters on the board to park there instead. But each time, exactly 4 hours and 1 minute later, I'd make my call, and away went another vehicle. After the 6th consecutive week of having her car towed, Barbara called an emergency HOA meeting. The community center was packed apparently. Nobody wanted to miss this showdown. "This has to stop," Barbara declared, standing at the podium, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "Noah Velasquez is engaged in a personal vendetta against me, abusing the HOA rules to harass and financially harm me." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Several residents unsuccessfully tried to suppress their laughter. "Mr. Velasquez," one of the elderly board members addressed me, "would you care to respond to these allegations?" I stood up calmly. "I'm simply following the rules set forth in our covenant, the same rules President Kendrick has so diligently enforced against others. If she feels the parking regulations are too strict or being applied unfairly, perhaps we should review all the HOA regulations for similar issues." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling out a folder, "I've documented 27 instances over the past 6 weeks where President Kendrick has deliberately interfered with my garbage collection service. I've compiled videos, photos, and statements from waste management employees confirming this pattern of behavior." I handed copies to each board member. "This constitutes harassment, tampering with private property, and potentially even fraud, as she's issuing violation notices for situations she herself is creating." Barbara's face went from red to purple. "This is absurd. I've been serving this community faithfully for years. Are you going to let this newcomer destroy everything we've built?" An older woman in the back stood up. "Barbara, you had my azaleas removed because they were non-compliant while I was recovering from hip surgery." A man near the front raised his hand. "You fined me $200 because my Christmas lights were up until January 3rd instead of January 1st when my mother had just passed away." Suddenly, the floodgates opened. Resident after resident stood to share their stories of Barbara's overzealous enforcement and selective application of the rules. Some had paid thousands in fines over the years. Others had been forced to make costly modifications to their homes for minor infractions. One family had even been driven to sell their house after Barbara's persistent harassment made living there unbearable. As the testimonials continued, Barbara's supporters on the board looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, the older of the two gentlemen cleared his throat. "I think it's time we called for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership," he announced. "And perhaps a complete review of our covenant and enforcement procedures." Barbara gasped. "Harold, you can't be serious. We've been on this board together for 8 years. Harold shook his head sadly. "And for 8 years I've watched you become increasingly controlling and punitive. I stayed silent too long because it was easier than confronting you. That ends today. The vote was nearly unanimous, 56-4 in favor of removing Barbara from her position as HOA president. The board would operate with 4 members until a special election could be held the following month. Barbara stormed out, threatening lawsuits against everyone from me to the entire board to the towing company. But her reign of terror was effectively over. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood atmosphere noticeably lightened. People began lingering to chat while collecting their mail. Children played outside more freely. One brave soul even put up a bird feeder that would have never passed Barbara inspection. The temporary board, led by Harold, initiated a comprehensive review of the HOA covenant with input from all residents. Many of the more restrictive and arbitrary rules were identified for modification or removal. The garbage bin policy was among the first to be revised. Bins could now be placed at the curb after 7 p.m. the evening before collection, and needed to be removed by 9 p.m. on collection day. I decided to run for the open board position, campaigning on a platform of reasonable enforcement, transparency, and community building rather than punitive measures. To my surprise and delight, I won by a comfortable margin, but Barbara wasn't finished with Pinewood Estates or with me. About 3 weeks after the election, I arrived home from work to find my front door ajar. Inside, my home had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. Curiously, none of my valuables were missing. My laptop, TV, and the cash I kept in my desk drawer were all untouched. What was missing were all my videos, photos, and documentation of Barbara's garbage bin sabotage, along with my copy of the HOA covenant that contained my handwritten notes detailing her violations. I called the police immediately. Officer Donovan arrived within 20 minutes and took my statement. So nothing of value was taken, just documents about your HOA dispute, he clarified, looking puzzled. That's right, and it had to be someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Officer Donovan glanced around the methodical chaos. This doesn't look like a typical burglary. Too targeted, too specific. Do you have any security cameras? I shook my head. The HOA doesn't allow visible security cameras on the exterior of homes. It's one of the rules we're working to change. Convenient, he muttered, making notes. Any witnesses? Anyone see anything unusual today? As if on cue, my doorbell rang. It was Martin's wife, Alina. Noah, I just heard what happened. Are you okay? She asked, concerned. Then, noticing Officer Donovan, she added, Oh good, the police are here. I saw something that might help. Officer Donovan perked up. Madam, what did you see? I work from home and was on a conference call near my front window around 2 p.m., Alina explained. I noticed Barbara Kendrick's car parked down the street and a man I didn't recognize walking toward Noah's house. He was wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform, but I don't recall any scheduled maintenance today. Can you describe this man? Officer Donovan asked, scribbling rapidly. Tall, maybe in his 30s, brown hair. The uniform was beige with some company logo I couldn't make out. He was carrying a toolbox. And you're certain you saw Miss Kendrick's car? Alina nodded firmly. Positive. Silver Mercedes, vanity plate HOA boss, hard to miss. Officer Donovan turned to me. We'll need to question Miss Kendrick. Do you have her address? I provided Barbara's information, and Officer Donovan left to pay her a visit, promising to keep me updated. He advised me to secure my home and not touch anything further until crime scene technicians could check for fingerprints. The next day, Officer Donovan called with unexpected news. Mr. Velasquez, we questioned Miss Kendrick about yesterday's incident. She claims she was at a dental appointment at the time of the break-in, but her dentist's office confirms she canceled that appointment. Additionally, we've identified the man in the maintenance uniform from security footage at a gas station nearby. He's been arrested before for similar break-ins typically hired by someone else to retrieve specific items. So Barbara hired someone to break into my home, I asked, stunned despite my suspicions. We can't confirm that yet, but we're bringing her in for further questioning. The suspect we've identified has a history of turning on his employers for reduced charges. I'll keep you posted. 2 days later, I received another call from Officer Donovan. Mr. Velasquez, I thought you'd want to know that we've arrested Barbara Kendrick for conspiracy to commit burglary, tampering with evidence, and filing a false police report. The man she hired gave us a full confession, including text messages where she specifically requested him to retrieve all documentation related to your HOA dispute. I sat down, overwhelmed by the news. I can't believe she went this far. People can become surprisingly irrational when their power is threatened, Officer Donovan observed. We've searched her home and found your missing documents, along with quite a collection of other residents' personal information, including what appears to be illegally obtained financial records, private emails, and medical information. What? I gasped. How did she get those? That's still under investigation, but it appears she's been using her position to access information. She had no right to maintain control over residents through implied or direct threats. The district attorney is considering additional charges of invasion of privacy and possibly blackmail, depending on what else we uncover. The case against Barbara Kendrick grew stronger by the day. As news of her arrest spread through Pinewood Estates, more residents came forward with stories of privacy violations, unexplained home entries during their absences, and suspicious coincidences, where Barbara seemed to know things about their personal lives she couldn't possibly have known legitimately. The most disturbing revelation came from Sophia Turner, a retired nurse who had served as HOA secretary under Barbara for 3 years. Sophia revealed that Barbara had maintained a detailed dossier on every household in Pinewood Estates, containing everything from financial difficulties to marital problems to health issues information she leveraged to ensure compliance with her increasingly arbitrary enforcement of HOA rules. She called it her community management strategy, Sophia explained during a community meeting. If someone challenged her, she'd casually mention something they wouldn't want others to know. Most people would back down immediately. Barbara's trial became the talk of Fairfield County. Local news covered the story extensively, dubbing it HOA Gone Wild. Barbara pleaded not guilty to all charges, insisting she was being framed by residents who resented her dedication to maintaining property values and community standards. The evidence, however, was overwhelming. Between the burglar's testimony, the recovered documents from her home, text messages and emails outlining her schemes, and testimony from dozens of residents, the jury took less than 4 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. Barbara Kendrick was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to all affected residents. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order preventing her from living in or visiting Pinewood Estates following her release. As Barbara was led from the courtroom, she turned to glare at me one last time. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "This neighborhood will fall apart without me." I shook my head. "No, Barbara, we're finally building a real community, one based on mutual respect, not fear and control." In the year since Barbara's conviction, Pinewood Estates has transformed. Under the new board's leadership, which includes me as vice president, Harold as president, and 3 other residents who shared our vision of a balanced approach, we've completely overhauled the HOA covenant. The revised rules focus on maintaining reasonable standards without micromanaging residents' lives. We've established transparent processes for handling violations, with an emphasis on communication and cooperation rather than punitive measures. Fines are now a last resort, not the first response. We've also instituted community building initiatives, monthly social gatherings at the pool during summer holiday celebrations, and a neighborhood assistance program where residents can request help with everything from moving heavy furniture to getting rides to medical appointments. Perhaps most symbolically, we replaced the stern Pinewood Estates, HOA rules strictly enforced sign at the neighborhood entrance with one that reads "Welcome to Pinewood Estates, a community working together." Last week, as I was placing my garbage bins at the curb on Monday evening, now perfectly allowable under our revised rules, Martin wandered over. "Can you believe it's been a year since the Great Garbage Wars?" he asked, chuckling. I smiled, looking around at our peaceful street, where children were playing freely. Holiday decorations remained up slightly past arbitrary deadlines without penalty, and not a single car had been towed in months. "Sometimes I still wake up expecting to find violation notices in my mailbox," I admitted. "Instead, you're writing the welcome letters to new residents," Martin pointed out. "That's quite a plot twist." It was true. As part of our new approach, every new Pinewood Estates resident now receives a personal welcome letter from the board, along with a simplified overview of community guidelines presented as suggestions rather than commandments, and an invitation to the next neighborhood gathering. "I drove by the prison last month for work," Martin said more quietly. "Saw her in the yard." "Barbara?" I asked, surprised. "We rarely mentioned her by name anymore." Martin nodded. "She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating." I thought about that for a moment. Power can make people seem larger than they are. Take it away, and you often find there wasn't much substance underneath. "Philosophical tonight, aren't we?" Martin laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. As he headed back to his house, I remained outside for a few minutes, enjoying the early evening air. A family walked by with their golden retriever, a pet that would have never been approved under Barbara's regime due to exceeding the 25-pound weight limit she had arbitrarily enforced, despite it not actually appearing anywhere in the original covenant. They waved cheerfully, and I waved back, reflecting on how a neighborhood should feel. Connected but not constrained, governed but not controlled, unified but still celebrating individuality. My garbage bins sat at the curb, undisturbed. They would be emptied tomorrow morning by friendly waste management workers who no longer had to navigate petty power plays, and I would return them to their proper place when I got home from work, not because I feared a fine, but because it was the considerate thing to do as a neighbor. Sometimes I wonder if Barbara, sitting in her prison cell, ever reflects on how differently things might have turned out had she channeled her organizational skills and attention to detail toward building up the community rather than controlling it. If she had used her position to help rather than hinder, to support rather than suppress. I hope that someday she does. I hope she learns that true leadership isn't about having power over others, but about empowering others. That a community thrives not when its members fear stepping out of line, but when they feel invested in the common good. As for me, I've found unexpected fulfillment in helping to rebuild what Barbara spent years damaging. There's something deeply satisfying about watching people who once avoided eye contact with neighbors now organizing impromptu barbecues and children's play dates. About seeing front doors open on pleasant evenings, residents sitting on porches actually enjoying their homes rather than anxiously monitoring them for potential violations. My term on the board ends next month, and I've decided not to run again immediately. It's important to rotate leadership and bring in fresh perspectives. Instead, I'm heading up a new initiative to create a small community garden in the previously underutilized space behind the pool area, a project Barbara had repeatedly blocked as messy and unbecoming of our standards. Life in Pinewood Estates isn't perfect. We still have disagreements about the direction of the community and occasional issues with residents who don't fulfill their responsibilities. But now, we handle these challenges through conversation and compromise, recognizing that behind every door is a human being with their own valid perspectives and life circumstances. The war over garbage bins seems almost comical in retrospect, yet it catalyzed a transformation that affected hundreds of lives for the better. Sometimes I drive past Peterson's towing and smile at the memory of those silver Mercedes, towaways 6 consecutive weeks of sweet, rule-abiding justice that ultimately led to a complete community reset. I keep a small framed photo on my desk of Barbara's car being towed that first time, not out of malice, but as a reminder that standing up to bullies, even when they come armed with clipboards and bylaws, is sometimes necessary to create positive change. My garbage is now collected on schedule every Tuesday morning, my bins sitting exactly where they should be, undisturbed by interfering hands. It's a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but every time I hear the rumble of the waste management truck, I smile and think, this is what freedom sounds like: freedom from petty tyranny, freedom to live with dignity in a home I own, freedom to be part of a community that values contribution over compliance. And all because I refused to let one power-hungry HOA president block my garbage pickup and had her car towed every single week until justice was finally served. Sometimes the pettiest battles lead to the most meaningful victories. In the case of Pinewood Estates, a war that began over garbage bins ultimately cleaned up something far more toxic than household waste. It removed the poison of unchecked power that had been contaminating our community for far too long. Now, as I look around at the thriving, friendly neighborhood we've become, I can't help but think that standing up to Barbara Kendrick was the best housewarming gift I could have given, not just to myself, but to every family that calls Pinewood Estates home.